Star Trek actor George Takei believes opposition to child body mutilation can lead to World War II internment camps. Yes, indeed. That is the comparison that this absolutely insufferable, quote unquote, celebrity recently made in a blog post to his Substack. Let's get into this here. He shared his thoughts initially as part of his Substack, The Big Picture, which he teased on Twitter. He wrote, this is what he wrote on Twitter. He wrote, despite decades of advocacy for LGBTQ plus rights, the troubling pattern of scapegoating persists. As someone who experienced forced relocation as a child, the sense of deja vu is deeply unsettling. It's crucial that we learn from history, push for change, and use our votes to secure a better future. In the actual body of the article, he recounted his personal experience of being imprisoned in a concentration camp after the Japanese attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor in December 1941. He explained this was done because, quote, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt needed to prove he was tough on the Japanese. From there, Takei described this as scapegoating, which he defines as a convenient target for politicians, a way to whip up hate and bigotry to win elections, a place to lay blame where none should lay. It meant hate, vilification, injustice, and even the very power of the state turned upon us. He then claimed this scapegoating is happening again to the, quote, wonderful, joyous, yet so often misunderstood and reviled LGBTQ plus community. Letters that represent a veritable rainbow of sexual and gender identities. I doubt that that description is absolutely false. It is not wonderful. It is not joyous. You can just look at the depression rates. You can look at the suicide rates. Any kind of measurable factor shows that it's not joyous or wonderful whatsoever. And that's because it rejects the human nature. It rejects natural law. It rejects how God intended us to, how God created us and intended for us to act. And thus, it is a rejection of God. As evidence of his claim, Takei points to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, armed with dangerous tropes from over 50 years ago, where gay and trans people are labeled as groomers who are a danger to children. Why politicians such as Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida began a campaign to drive us out, trace our families and identities in education, in library books, and in our own communities. They even targeted retail stores that supported us during our month of Pride. Yes, because people are fed up with being propagandized by this evil ideology and trying to indoctrinate people into it. That is what Governor Ron DeSantis and the state of Florida and the people of Florida rejected when they passed a law last February saying that they would not allow gender identity and sexual orientation education to children in kindergarten through third grade. But you aren't going to mention that, are you, Mr. George Takei? Because you have a narrative to spin. You aren't going to mention how the promotion of this ideology is destroying people's lives, both mentally and physically. You won't mention that because, again, you have your narrative to push. As far as the retail stores being targeted, it is about time, and it is about time that they had to financially pay for supporting the evil ideology that they were pushing. I mean, these specifically, Target was pushing transgender ideology on infants with baby suits, baby swimsuits. Are you kidding me? Absolutely disgusting and sick. But George Takei won't mention what was actually going on, will he? No, he won't. Instead, he's going to play the victim and say that he's the victim and that his allies are the victim. In fact, he attempts to defend body mutilation of innocent children in the guise of transgender ideology. This is what he said. He wrote, more ominously, and in the name of protecting trans kids and in defiance of all experts, there's no such thing as trans kids. Absolutely not. If you're calling your kid a trans kid, you are abusing your child. And anyways, he goes on and says, and in defiance of all expert opinion, politicians at the state level have banned critically necessarily trans medical care, leaving desperate parents and families without alternatives. It is not critically necessary. It is not medical care. Putting children on hormone blockers, cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, and then even maybe castrating them with surgery is not medical care. It is butchering. It is absolutely a butchering. It is a mutilation of those children. It is abuse, and it should be against the law. It is not medical care whatsoever, George Takei. It was not only ignorant, but it was also deliberately cruel. No, it is not cruel. It is the opposite of cruel. It is love. It is saving those people from the butcher's knife that you want to put them under. He goes on and says, and it is leading to untold suffering for young people already burdened with the weight of successfully transition. Absolutely not. 41% is like the suicide rate. No way. No way. Like the data does not justify anything that you're saying. It shows the opposite. And look, he even admits it here. He says they are a group that currently suffers the highest rates of suicide among teens. He thinks butchering people is going to solve a problem. No. These people are suffering because of your absolutely evil ideology that you're trying to impose on them. You're trying to provide the solution when you're actually the cause. Ridiculous. Next, he says, I have seen where scapegoating, if left unchallenged, leads. This is where he talks about, makes his comparison to World War II. And it is a very dark place indeed, and I am alarmed that the fear-mongering and hate, particularly against the trans community, are just the beginning. It's not hate. Wanting these people to be sound body and mind, that's actually love. As St. Thomas Aquinas says, willing the good of another is love. That is what we want. That's why you pass these laws, because you want the best for those people. This guy doesn't want the best for these people. He wants to butcher them. He is a butcher. I know this because it was how it started with us 80 years ago. First the editorials and the brutal restrictive rules, followed by the ire of our larger communities, which ultimately turned upon us. America is not somehow immune from these dark forces. Here we go. The kind that led to the horrors of the Holocaust in Europe. Indeed, we have a long and terrible history of bringing the full power of the state behind the very laws that separate, discriminate, and punish based on differences in race or sexuality. So he's completely wrong. Opposing the mutilation of children is the correct and right decision, no matter how much he tries to demonize those protecting the innocent. There's lots of people way smarter than me, way smarter than George Takei that explain this. So one of them is Archbishop Alexander Sample of the Archdiocese of Portland, Oregon. He noted in his A Catholic Response to Gender Identity that gender identity theory is a framework that is increasingly dominant in Western culture. Clearly, just look around you. It's everywhere. Movies, TV, comic books, novels, celebrity opinions, news pieces, opinion editorials, commercials that you see on TV. You've got companies indoctrinating it with you through their DEI programs. It's everywhere. We've got rainbow flags on U.S. embassies and at the White House that are in a central location above the U.S. flag. They're lighting up the White House in rainbow colors. I mean, you can't escape it. It's everywhere. Archbishop Sample goes on to explain that this theory affirms the subjective sense of gender over the objective fact of biological sex and recommends the process of transitioning to identify as one's chosen rather than given sex. It is well documented that transgender people have higher risks of suicide, and thus it is supposed that these procedures are ultimately life-saving. However, these claims are not well supported by scientific evidence, particularly when it comes to treating gender dysphoric young people. One of the few robust long-term studies available found that individuals have undergone medical transition have a rate of suicidality that is 19 times higher than the general population, right? 19 times higher, like 19 times. The evidence indicates that medical transition at best does not solve the problem of elevated suicidality and at worst exacerbates it. I would think 19 times higher. It definitely indicates that it exacerbates it. We've also got the Catechism of the Catholic Church explaining that it is the government's role to protect the innocent. This is one of the things that the government, the state, is supposed to do. So it's not wrong for the state to pass laws restricting people like George Takei from taking kids to doctors to have them butchered. The Catechism says, political authorities are obliged to respect the fundamental rights of the human person. They will dispense justice humanely by respecting the rights of everyone, especially families and the disadvantaged. Thus, passing laws that ban these vile procedures that Takei is clearly advocating is right and just. In fact, this idea is not just shared by Catholics. Andrew Eisker, a pastor of 4th Street Evangelical Church in Waska, Minnesota, explains how the state's legislating of morality shapes public opinion and perception. I found this really interesting when I read this, I found a way to include it in this article. But he writes, rules don't change a person's heart directly and on their own, but they absolutely do train you before you are even able to understand why those rules are given. So he's saying that the laws obviously aren't going to shape your heart, shape your mind, shape the way you think about these rules, but they definitely do train you with like the stick and the carrot, right? As an example, he points to the legalization of gay marriage in the United States in the late 1990s into the early 2000s. Defense of marriage acts and gay marriage bans were extremely popular, even winning majorities in places like California in 2008. That wasn't that very long ago. Not very long ago, 15 years? That same year, the then Senator Obama campaigned for president, publicly opposed gay marriage. Then all of a sudden, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Obergefell v. Hodges that the United States Constitution guarantees the right for homosexual men to play act as married man and wife. Immediately, all the Civil Rights Act provisions became applied to homosexuals and eventually to virtually every other conceivable sexual perversion. Concurrently, public opinion of homosexuality rapidly changed. The majority that had only years earlier opposed homosexuality now approved of it. Their moral views were legislated for them. I think that that opinion is right. I mean, the evidence shows that. You can look at the history. Clearly, public opinion drastically changed after that Supreme Court ruling. And with it, seemingly people's morality was changed. Then Eisker concludes saying, so with this in mind, Christians should absolutely want to pursue law for the sake of public morality. Cultural Christianity is good. All legislation is legislating one morality or another. God changes men's hearts, and one instrument he uses is the commands of those he places in authority. I mean, what do you think the 10 Commandments are, if not laws legislating morality, right? Should be a no-brainer, but somehow people have gotten this libertarian idea that the government shouldn't be actually passing laws about regarding morality. It's just utterly ridiculous how people have been duped into it. And I'll admit, I even was in my 20s, definitely was. Fortunately, I realized that how wrong that was. So as for the idea that Takei's community is being scapegoated, the members of his quote-unquote own community have made it very clear what their goals are. They are indeed targeting children with these vile ideologies. You can just point to the San Francisco Gay Men's Choir. They released a song, and these are the lyrics in the song. You think that will corrupt your kids if our agenda goes unchecked. Funny, justice once you're correct. We'll convert your children, happens bit by bit, quietly and subtly, and you'll barely notice it. You can keep them from disco, warn about San Francisco, make them wear pleated pants. We don't care. We'll convert your children. We'll make them tolerant and fair. The gay agenda is coming home. So very clear what they are trying to do, actively trying to indoctrinate your children into this heinous ideology and lifestyle. You've got Disney television animation executive producer LaToya Raveneau specifically saying she has a not at all secret gay agenda. And she says here, maybe it was that way in the past, but I guess something must have happened in the last day or turning it around. They're going hard, and then like all that momentum that I felt, that sense, I don't have to be afraid to have these two characters kiss in the background. I was just wherever I could, just basically adding queerness. If you see something queer in the show, no one would stop me, and no one was trying to stop me. So she's literally says she has a gay agenda, and she's trying to put it in children's shows. So clearly trying to indoctrinate children into this quote-unquote not at all secret gay agenda that she was pushing. There's numerous other examples. Those are obviously two that make it very clear that they have an agenda and they're trying to push it. As for this idea that preventing mutilation of children through government action is somehow comparable to World War II style internment camps, it's absolutely, utterly ridiculous and absurd. You're actually protecting innocent children. It is the opposite of what Mr. George Takei here is claiming. But again, it's not really a surprise given the fact that he lives an immoral lifestyle. So he would be, I think, predisposed, given the lifestyle that he lives, to not understanding what is right and what is wrong.